Okay, the next panel is Marc Berejka from Microsoft and Stuart Overby from Motorola. Welcome. You can do either order you prefer. Makes no difference. And I probably pronounced everybody's name wrong, so go ahead. Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
It's old technology.
Yes. It's wired microphones, I see.
It's really old.
Good morning, Councilwoman Brewer and Councilman Capel. Thank you for inviting Motorola to participate in this hearing on TV white space and on the important issue of protecting wireless microphones for Broadway, which of course is one of New York's most important businesses. Motorola has developed technology that we believe can provide the answer and allow TV stations, wireless microphones, and TV white space devices to coexist in the spectrum without interference. Before I say much more about that particular technology, let me just point out Motorola is in the midst of celebrating our 80th year of innovation in communications. And these innovations included the first public safety radio in a police car was 70 years ago, portable cell phones, while most people were looking at designing cell systems as mobile rather than portables, and the system that supported communications when the U.S. landed on the moon. We believe that TV white space provides the opportunity for a new innovation on the horizon, and that's cognitive radio technology. And that's basically technology that is smart enough to find the vacant gaps in the radio spectrum and operate on those gaps without interfering with current operations such as wireless microphones used by Broadway. All wireless communications require the foundation of radio spectrum to operate, just as your home has to have a foundation before you build the rest of the home. The TV band includes 300 megahertz of spectrum, and to put that in perspective, that's 6,000 times the amount of spectrum used for each channel on which your police, fire departments, and transit systems communicate. There are gaps in the 300 megahertz where the spectrum is not used for TV broadcast. Some of those gaps are used today, of course, in confined areas like Broadway theaters, houses of worship, and concert venues for wireless microphones. However, we believe there are many of the spectrum gaps that still go unused. Also, to kind of put this 300 megahertz in perspective, that's roughly about 1,500 potential microphone channels. Not all of those, of course, can be used in the same area. My understanding from discussions with some of the wireless microphone experts is that 12 to 15 channels of frequencies, wireless mic frequencies, are available for every TV channel that is set aside. Motorola has developed technology that can access these gaps in the spectrum while protecting TV broadcast and wireless microphone use. The technology is called geolocation, and the basic approach is that before selecting a TV channel in which to operate, the TV white space device would access information in a database on which channels are used and which are vacant in a given area. Information on TV stations are already in the FCC's database, and we've been discussing this issue with wireless microphone experts, and they've agreed that one of the best ways to protect wireless microphone use is to then designate some channels in the database in each market for wireless microphone use in which TV white space devices will not operate. Further, if additional wireless mic channels are needed beyond those designated on a nationwide basis, supplemental channels could be entered in the database for protection in a given area, for example, Broadway. We all need to understand that some of the previous panelists talked about the range of the TV wireless microphones that are used in the TV spectrum is very short. And for example, I think a channel that might be used on Broadway for wireless microphones could be reused in the Bronx for a TV white space device without any impact to Broadway. So that's one of the things to keep in mind. We believe this is a practical way to protect important operations currently in the band, and at the same time open unused TV white space spectrum to help bring broadband to all Americans across the country, help make the industries more competitive, and use the limited spectrum resources more effectively. We're working with the FCC to implement rules that meet all those important goals. And that's kind of the gist of my prepared statement. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you want to testify, sir?
Sure. For the record, it's Marc Berejka.
Got it.
From Microsoft. I was coming in on the train today and I had an inspired thought, and so if you will indulge me, I'll supplement my written remarks with the inspired thought I had today, and if you like, I'll reduce these supplemental comments to writing for you. The thought I came up with is that it's really important for us in the end to reframe this discussion. And in the process, I'm hoping that the Council will be amenable to reframing the resolution. Right now, the way the debate's been framed, it's been talked about as a zero-sum game. The press loves zero-sum games. They love the battles. As human beings, we're prone to zero-sum thinking frequently. It's us versus them, Wall Street versus Main Street, uptown versus downtown. But personally, I feel that we're lucky that we live in a time when, through a lot of hard work, innovation, and collaboration, we don't have to have zero-sum outcomes. We can design and generate win-wins. And we can collaborate on a future experience that we share as opposed to our experience versus their experience. And I think this is, as a technology representative, I think this is really, really something that we excel at. You know, to reduce it to its basics, technology innovation is just about tool building. We build tools. The manufacturers of tools generate wins for themselves, but they generate wins for their users. And we're especially excited about the use of white spaces because we think these tools in the white spaces can help bridge the digital divide, both in urban areas and in rural areas. But the magic of high technology is that you can add winners to the mix, or at least avoid inflicting harm on others. So you can have win-win-win, or win-win-win, and at least no harm to other interested stakeholders. And so in this regard, Microsoft is supportive of different technologies, be it geolocation or be it the beaconing that was referred to in the earlier panel as a means to protect Broadway and other theatrical operations. And we and others in our Whitespace Coalition are earnest about collaborating with the performing arts to the point where we're looking for ways to help legalize their operations. As indicated in the last panel, many of the operations currently are technically unlawful, and we're looking forward to a possibility of making a fix to that. So in this way, we'd also just ask for folks from the Broadway community to alter their perspective and share our perspective on win-win. And in the end, we think that things like turning on a beacon to identify when you're operating a wireless microphone is a small burden to carry when you look at the benefits of extending wireless broadband to inner cities, be it wireless Harlem or wireless Starrett City, or whether you're extending wireless broadband out onto an Indian reservation. So at the very end of the day, the thought that came to me while I was riding in on the train this morning was that we have opportunity here. You know, and if there's one thing about New York City that we're supposed to cherish, it's that it's a place for opportunity. In this issue in particular, I hope that we can look for opportunity in a win-win form and not via combat and hyperbolic overstatement of fearful situations. So again, I'd like to ask the Council to consider reframing the resolution, to frame it as a statement of opportunity, a statement for win-win outcomes, one that recognizes the value of Broadway, but also the value of wireless Harlem and other operators like it. I think that with the application of smart technology, both Broadway and digital divide closing devices can thrive. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. We've been joined by Tish James, who's council member from the great borough of Brooklyn. One question I have for both of you, if we're talking about this database that you talked about, and the win-win, which I think would be great. I tried to say that in my opening remarks, is we want Broadway, we want television, we want wireless devices to be able to bring opportunity to everybody. So the best scenario would be to have all of this work together. And the question is it possible? How would portable devices access a database of a broadband connection? is something like, if something like that is not available in an area. I mean, that was something that, go ahead, sir.
Yes, Councilwoman Brewer, the proposal that Motorola has put on the table is that any portable and mobile devices would be wirelessly tethered back to an access point and a TV white space access point. That access point would be connected, through the internet to the FCC's database. And this provision so that if it loses that connection, then after some period of time, it would, the devices would go off the air as well. So there's some kind of fail-safe protection in there. I think, in essence, what you do is have the access point could send control signals to a mobile or portable device that's associated with it, the TV white space device, that lets it know which channel to transmit on. And so if, again, I think the construction we've talked about is having, let's say in the New York TV market area, you would enter in certain channels in the database that would always be for wireless microphone. And so the TV white space device, when it accesses those databases, or that database, would know to stay off of those channels. In high use areas like Broadway, you could enter in, for that, maybe a mile around Broadway or whatever the distance needs to be. You could also put in additional channels. I think you'd also do the same thing when you've got, on a temporary basis, when you've got a sports, like the Super Bowl or something. Obviously, there's lots of kind of super scale events like that. They use lots of wireless microphones and in-ear monitor systems and everything. However, what that does allow you to do is it doesn't prevent those channels from being used to bring broadband to all Americans in other areas, or used in manufacturing plants, utilities and others to be more competitive on their facilities, to have video to be safer, to help work their machines and everything, so that they can be more economically competitive in the world market. So there are lots of benefits of TV white space. We think we can do both and protect the wireless mic use. I mean, in essence, wireless mics are the first TV white space use. It's just been doing it on a manual basis, whereas the technology is now available to do it more automatically.
Do you think this would add a lot to the cost of the cultural world?
Well, I think if you're putting them in the database, I mean, I think the FCC could adopt rules that basically provides the opportunity to register. I mean, first of all, they would put some number of channels in the database. There would be kind of a standard number of channels. And then if you needed extra channels, they'd provide an opportunity to register additional channels. And I can't imagine that would be that big of a burden.
Okay. Obviously, we're looking at a November time frame if that's what the FCC carries out. Do you think that it would be possible, in order to support a win-win for everybody, to have more time to work out all of these issues? What do you think about this time frame that the FCC has put forward?
So I actually think it's long overdue for the FCC to act. The FCC initiated this proceeding several years ago, and honestly has been slow in making progress on it. And we're excited about the prospect of resolution come November or December. And from the high-tech community's perspective, we fear that if the FCC does not continue to move apace like it is now, that with the changeover in administration and potential changes in commissioners, et cetera, will be pushed back by another year, if not longer. It's just the way things work down in D.C., and that's another year lost in terms of innovating and rolling out service to people who need cheaper internet access.
One other point on that. A decision before the end of the year, by November, could always look forward to actual use of the TV white space devices starting when the digital TV transition ends on February 17th, 2009. I think that's the concept of TV white space, is that it's when the DTV transition is done, which again is mandated at February 17, 2009. So the FCC could reach a decision in November or by the end of the year that says, here's what the rules are going to be, and actual use begins February 2009.
So another thing I'd like to point out is that this might sound a little bit too legalistic, but From the FCC's perspective, the white spaces devices that the high-tech community is looking forward to building and that we're supporting rules around, they will operate on what's called a secondary basis. And the FCC will not certify equipment unless they will not certify equipment that operates on a secondary basis unless that equipment can demonstrably comply with interference mitigation rules. So what we're really talking about here, I don't think, is, again, yes or no, either or. We're talking about under what conditions should white spaces devices be permitted to operate. And on this score, I'd like to point out that in the UK, the regulator Ofcom has already affirmatively said that they are going to permit white spaces devices. And the London Theatre District is a healthy theatre district, and the UK regulators are just as concerned as you folks are about protecting those operations. So again, you know, getting back to my theme of win-win here, it's really not yes or no, it's how.
Councilmember Coppell, you had something you wanted to say.
I'm a little bit confused over, maybe we shouldn't say win-win and those phrases because they confuse me. I don't understand what they mean exactly, and I think that they don't add to the discussion, they just create confusion. I don't see what's wrong with the resolution as it reads right now, because it says that there is a concern that if you open up this white space to new devices, that will interfere with television broadcasters, performing artists, professional sports leagues, and incumbent wireless microphone users. There's a concern over it. And all the resolution says is that those concerns have to be addressed before there is some regulatory change, which sounds a little bit to me like deregulation. And if you want to study whether deregulation should be hastily entered into, I think that the events of recent weeks and days illustrate that that's not a good idea. So forgetting about win-win or win-lose or zero-sum games and looking at the resolution, it says before the FCC shall deregulate, which it sounds like they're doing at least to some degree, these legitimate concerns of important industries should be taken into account. If the gentleman from Motorola is correct, there can be a compatible use of the portable devices and these, and that's fine. I'm not opposed to it if it can be done. And I don't think there's anything wrong with asking the body that regulates the use of these devices and regulates the use of the broadcast spectrum to be particularly sensitive to the concerns that the resolution addresses. So I don't quite understand. If you want to answer that, you can, but I don't understand why you shouldn't actually say, yes, that's fine. That resolution's fine. We think we have the answer, and we'll satisfy the FCC. So if you can't satisfy the FCC as this request, then the FCC shouldn't go ahead.
So I'll take that on. I'm happy to. Thank you. I think at this stage in the deliberations, after many years of FCC process, we can safely say that the deliberative process down there in DC has become highly politicized. We've moved away from the technical merits, and it has become highly politicized. As a natural outgrowth of that, I'm hoping it won't shock you that I believe this proceeding itself is highly politicized. And unfortunately, what I find in reading the draft resolution is a lack of balance. It reads as a political statement that incorporates some of the biases and perspectives of the panel that just testified. And my suggestion is that a future version of the resolution recognize the balance of equities, the balance of the equities of wireless microphone users today and the equity interests of people who today cannot afford broadband service, but who we hope will be able to afford broadband service either in this city, any other city, or across rural America because of technologies used in the white spaces. So recognizing that this document is a political document and not a technical one, the request is that it be scrubbed to make it more balanced.
Well, let me, if I may, Madam Chair, I just would say I may certainly look at wording that you might suggest. I don't think the suggestion of the chair is to retard progress in this area, because I know she's deeply committed to increasing use of technology.
So I think to go down one more layer, I think it's important to get on the record for you that while there are technical issues at stake here, not all the technical issues are being carefully and I'll say accurately characterized. That's the province of the FCC. That's the province of technical companies and technical experts to discuss with the FCC. And so what really concerns me is that as we sit up here in New York City, some of these technical inaccuracies which are being used for a political agenda are moving their way into the thinking around the resolution. And so I'd much sooner council spend a good deal of time being briefed on the technical issues than, frankly, work off the written testimony that's been submitted by either side. I'll just give you one example from the immediate past panel. A statement was made on the immediate past panel that no two signals can operate on the same channel. That is inaccurate. Today, everybody can drive listening to FM radio, and every FM radio station is broadcasting that they have now a digital offering. The digital offering and the traditional analog offering of an FM broadcast operate on the same channel. Radio frequencies can be used very adeptly, as the gentleman from Motorola testified. There was also a suggestion that licensing would be difficult. I have not practiced licensing for many years, but when I did, for nonprofits and for public safety entities, the fee for a license was $35 for a 5-year license. And you could license a geography. You did not have to license a particular use, so a single theater could own a license as opposed to an individual performance. So there are these levels of factual matters that I think need to be looked at closely if you're going to make an informed resolution, or if you just frankly want to look at the social equities. I do think you end up at a net balance where the social equities of what Broadway and other entertainment industries have to offer are valuable, but so are the social equities of lower cost broadband for underserved people.
Councilmember James, did you want to say something? Okay. What exactly do these devices look like in terms of the future? In other words, we're talking about devices that would in fact be compatible. That's our win-win situation. What would they actually look like for the user who is able to then access much more broadband?
So my expectation is that the devices, the white space devices, don't look much different than today's Wi-Fi devices. And if we go back in time, some of us can remember the first Wi-Fi devices. They plugged into a personal computer via a card, and they had the little antenna baked into that card, and that was a transmitter receiver. Much like that device there has probably a Bluetooth dongle, if you can see the little gray thing hanging off that. But over time, the price of the technology comes down, it gets integrated into the hardware, and then you don't even notice it as a user. So, for example, my cell phone, it operates on licensed frequencies, built by Motorola, by the way. It operates on licensed frequencies, but it's also got, in this little device, it's got 2 little wireless radios, unlicensed radios as well. I have Wi-Fi in here, and I have Bluetooth in here. So in this little guy, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, plus cellular. And so you can imagine any form factor. It could be this guy, that guy, that guy, this guy. They could all be white space devices. And initially, it would be through a plug-in, but eventually they'd be baked in.
One question would be, say for instance, you have that device, and it's in use, and it does interfere with television reception or with some of the Broadway microphones. how would you get those devices back out of the market? How would the Broadway folks feel secure in the future?
So the way these...
I'm just saying, for instance, you don't know.
Yeah, for instance, I really think that that's a hypothetical that involves a bit of a stretch.
Okay.
You know, no consumer is going to open up this thing and try to figure out where the Wi-Fi chip is or where the Bluetooth chip is. And if the consumer does open up this thing and try to mess with the Wi-Fi or the Bluetooth chip, they're going to break it. And so, as I said earlier, the FCC will only be certifying devices that meet the interference mitigation requirements.
The other question I had is because we are in New York focused on Broadway, and I think you all know that we want to make sure that Broadway is secure. Would all devices carry beacons, or would that be something that the theater industry would be more focused on?
Let me
What-
just-
in your scenario.
Yeah, let me just address it. We've talked about beacons as well, and what I talked about this morning with a database, that's different than beacons.
Correct. They're two different
The
ones.
beacon is basically, it's a device that could be similar to a wireless microphone, but it's a higher powered device, so it could be sensed more easily than the very, very low power wireless microphone transmitter. I mean, we've built a prototype beacon. We provided it to the FCC, basically built it off of a platform of a two-way radio. So it's not an issue of building, and I think the question is, where is it practical to deploy them, when is it not practical to deploy them? Clearly, that's one answer. If you wanted to, say, in a specific area, I need more channels than those that were set aside everywhere, I could put up a beacon and say, okay, I'm also using these channels. That's one solution. The other solution is to put those channels for a confined area in the database. So I think either way would work. Based on some of the discussions we've had with, again, wireless mic experts and broadcast personnel and all, what I'm gathering is it may be more practical in some cases to just put the added channels in the database as opposed to putting up a beacon. But both, technically, either one could work, but it's which one works practically.
And the beacons themselves, would they interfere with anything or not? Because they have to also operate
the beacons themselves
wirelessly.
also have to operate
wirelessly.
on a portion of the spectrum, so they would operate, if I'm using some of the frequencies, the wireless mic frequencies in channel 43, I mean,
Right.
I'm picking a number there.
Yeah.
Let's say TV channel 43, and if I'm using some wireless mic frequencies within channel 43, I would also put up a beacon that's somewhere within that channel that would then radiate a higher powered signal than a wireless mic usually radiates. And basically that, if you had TV white space devices sensing those beacons, it would say, oh, it would sense it and I cannot operate on channel 43. Again, that's one approach. The other is to put channel 43 for Broadway into the database as an example.
So to give you a practical example of this concept of co-channel operations, the field test that they performed at FedEx Field was interesting to all the geeks that were there. So at FedEx Field, when they were playing this football game, the referees and everybody, they're using their wireless microphones. FedEx Field is kind of in a suburban area. It's surrounded by parking lots and all, but beyond the parking lots is residential area. In the residential area, to the FCC's knowledge, nobody ever complained that they were losing TV reception.
All right.
But it turned out that in FedEx Field, during this day of testing, the wireless mics were operating on occupied TV channels. So inside FedEx, the refs were doing fine on a TV channel. That outside FedEx, people were receiving regular TV on. There was co-channel operations and everybody was happy.
So what your point is that could be across the board for the future? That
It's
would-
workable.
How much, in other words, if there was a larger residential population like in New York City, because with all due respect to Maryland, there are more of us here, and with a coterminous, so to speak, situation, do you think that the experiment that existed in Maryland could also be applicable in New York, where there are so many more televisions, maybe 8 million televisions or whatever the number is, as well as whatever we're planning for devices? You think that's possible, even though it's not it's a much more congested area? In other words, we have more televisions here, we have a lot of ball fields here, we have a lot of other uses that may not exist in more suburban, rural areas. So compared us to the suburban or rural area, do you think you'd have the same situation? Would it was same non-problem?
Just comment, I mean, I think with, first of all, you know, the FCC has to develop the rules under which TV white space devices would operate. So if the FCC puts in channels that are designated for wireless mics in the rules, again, some might be over the broad whole market area. Some may be extra channels that we would put in just in Broadway. And they would also define, I think there's work probably that, you know, calculations they can do, some very smart engineers at the FCC that can say, oh, okay, if these extra channels are put in Broadway, you can use them if you are a mile or more away or half a mile or more away. I don't know exactly what that number is off the top of my head, but you could determine that, and you'd factor in, is it indoor use or is it outdoor use? I think one of the previous panelists noted that you know, some of the signal is absorbed by the buildings and everything. That also works for signals coming in from TV white space devices. Some of it would be absorbed. So whether it's an outdoor event or an indoor event, I mean, those things, they can be calculated, and I think the FCC can do that, and then a TV white space device would say, oh, at this set of coordinates, you know, I cannot use this TV channel if I'm within a mile or half a mile or whatever the distance is.
I think congestion in New York City is actually a good way to think about this problem holistically. One of the reasons why wiring schools or using today's Wi-Fi in schools or in public housing today is expensive is because you don't want to put wires through cinder block, or it's expensive to do that. Also, these buildings made of stone and steel reinforcements, they knock down signals. And so one of the advantages of the white spaces is that they do a much better job penetrating walls. So you recognize this in your initial remarks. That's why we're excited about use of the white spaces, because you can get more reach. You don't have to worry about buying more equipment. If you're going to do Wi-Fi, you don't have to worry about drilling holes through walls if you're going to lay wire. At the same time, if you think about operations, you know, in Midtown, if you have somebody speaking at my level in a theater using the wireless microphone, effectively what the beacon does is it screams, and it screams at a level that then goes beyond through the wall to the surrounding area, and it's up to the FCC to decide how big that surrounding area could be, but it screams and it penetrates outside the walls and basically says, don't use this channel, don't use this channel. But by the time you get past, I don't know, you know, 80th Street or something like that, that scream will have dissipated. So north of there, the white space would be available, and you could operate a more robust wireless internet hub.
Councilmember James?
I apologize for being late, and as someone who has advocated with this chair to address the technology divide in quote-unquote outer boroughs and quote-unquote inner cities, I mean, I recognize and your concerns and in fact are sympathetic and torn about this resolution. So my question to you is ultimately, is it your position to put off this FCC regulation and to put off this resolution until such time as prototypes are developed so that they can both exist? Is that the bottom line?
No, my bottom line is that I'd prefer to work in deliberate fashion, and I think I speak for the rest of our commercial interests in the White Spaces Coalition, that we'd like to work in deliberate fashion to reframe the resolution, but not do anything to slow down the FCC's process. The FCC's process has already been delayed by a number of years.
And do you have language for another resolution, an alternative resolution?
I believe that others who may be on the next panel may have offered up language. I personally have not.
Thank you.
Just one additional point. I think we've had a number of discussions with the FCC over the last, probably 18 months or so on this issue. And when we've talked with them, again, it's the same position we've had here today, is that for TV white space to be successful, I mean, you have to have the right rules for TV white space, but you also need to protect broadcast and wireless microphones. We've said that from day one. And the discussions I've had with the people at the FCC, I think it's clear that they understand that. I mean, so I don't think they, I think they're doing exactly, they're wrestling with and doing exactly what your resolution suggests that they do, which is to find a way to authorize TV white space without it negatively impacting broadcast or wireless microphones.
And
I think that's what they're doing. So.
And how would you describe the test that was performed at the Majestic Theater in New York on August 12th? Was that successful, unsuccessful? How would you describe that?
Well, I wasn't exactly at the test, so I'm probably not the best person to ask. I think what we've talked about, the geolocation technology we've talked about, is not what the FCC has done most of its testing on. What they've done most of the testing on is sensing, where I have to basically pick up a signal off the air. With geolocation, basically you have things in the database, and you determine that you cannot operate or should not operate on those channels. So I think it's a little more reliable.
I'm glad you re-raised the test at the Majestic, though, because it points to another, I'll just say, questionable statement from the prior panel. I won't defend the Singapore device. I think everybody in our coalition recognizes that device was not performing well and failed. But the Philips device, this is Philips Electronics, a major manufacturer. The Philips device, yes, it was said, generated multiple false positives, which makes it sound bad. But it's actually, if it is bad, it's bad from the perspective of folks who are proponents of white space devices, because the false positive says that this channel is occupied, don't use it. So basically, in my last comment I said that a white space device could pick up a screaming beacon and not operate. Basically, the Philips device was picking up whispers. And so it was oversensitive. And if anything, it demonstrates the ability to sense very low signal in TV spectrum.
And last question, I'm sorry, Chair. What was the basis for the delays related to the promulgation of FCC rules?
It's interesting. The history here is long and tortured. I'll give you the thumbnail sketch. The first FCC chairman under President Bush was Michael Powell, son of Colin Powell, and he doesn't look like it, but he's a geek. He's a geek. No, I say, because he's a lawyer, lobbyist, politician, right? He doesn't wear pocket protectors like guys at Microsoft do. Nor does he come to work in cutoff shorts and sandals. Those are the geeks I see. So he was a big fan of spectrum reform, and in particular using spectrum reform to close the digital divide. And so he kicked off this proceeding. And as many of these proceedings go, it took time. And along the way, he decided that he wanted to pursue other objectives personally, professionally. And so he moved out of the position, and in the second Bush administration, a new chairman came in, and the chairman sets the agenda. Basically, the chairman moved this issue further down on his list of priorities, and it took lobbying by consumer interest groups and by tech companies to say, hey, look, you guys are sitting on your hands, let's get this thing done.
Just to add, the current chairman, Martin, I think indicated last week, I believe it was reported in Dow Jones, so that he is supportive of TV white space. And I think when we've talked with the technical people, I mean, again, they're wrestling with these issues, but I think they have much of the information that they need to move forward.
And very, very last question is, if in fact the rules were delayed, to what extent would this have on communities that obviously do not have access to broadband? such as the community that I represent?
Well, the OECD said that the U.S. is 15th down on the list of countries of broadband penetration. And so I think, obviously everyone wants to move the U.S. up the ladder on that broadband penetration as much as possible so we can be more competitive in the global market. And delaying, this, once we believe we have a solution that can address the wireless mic issues, can address protection of television, and also allow TV white space to move forward. So we don't see a reason to delay, actual implementation. And at the same time, there's a reason to move forward without any further delay, which is to move the U.S. further up that ladder of broadband penetration.
I think even whenever it passes, we still have to get people computers, we have to get meaningful access, we have to get training, and it costs money. So there's a lot of aspects to getting people real, but, every bit is a step, but those are other impediments that we are working to try to deal with. It's a long process. Just one final question, and I think you have answered this, but you do feel confident that the FCC has enough information to promulgate rules today so that your devices would not interfere? I mean, you feel that whatever time frame they're under, that once they do, that there would be enough rules promulgated after that. I know whenever we pass legislation here in the City Council, it's usually some months before there are actual implementation because there have to be rules and regulations. That's true in all government. This is much more complicated than passing vending rules or many other aspects of city government. So obviously you're working with the FCC, but do you feel the situation is possible to promulgate rules that would keep interference out?
Yes, I do. I think they have, they're certainly, getting information. Motorola's been in to talk with them, Microsoft, others. They're also hearing from reputable companies like Stuart. They're hearing from the broadcast representatives, someone in the room today. So, they've heard, the different concerns, I think, and they're mixing that together and to put together rules that we believe will allow TV white space and at the same time, protect broadcast and wireless mic use.
So one of the things to bear in mind is that while my colleague and I and others sit under your spotlight today, this spotlight has been burning bright and intensely for quite a while in Washington, D.C.
By all the phone calls I've been getting, yeah. I believe you.
But to give you a flavor for it, the major manufacturer, maybe the only major manufacturer of wireless microphones, Shure Corporation, has been doing a phenomenal job raising awareness about their concerns to the point where in Washington, D.C., we not only see the appearance of Broadway interests, but we see the NFL, we see NASCAR, we see Hollywood, and the TV broadcasters. Trust me, they carry a lot of political weight. So the FCC understands the magnitude of what's before them and the need, therefore, to have technical information they can rely on.
Thank you very much. We've been joined by Councilmember James Sanders from the Borough of Queens and Councilmember Bill de Blasio from Brooklyn. Thank you both very much. This is very informative, and I appreciate your time.